Dana would never.
Well, this takes us seafood.
We're sorry.
Okay, are we?
Yes.
Are we ready? No, I can't say we're ready.
Ready to roll.
Okay, are we ready? Okay. Okay, I'd like to call the Budget and Finance Committee meeting of January 19th, 2012 to order. Our next business is approval of the November 29, 2011 minutes for the committee.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Item 3 is consideration of the proposed fiscal year 2012-2013 budget calendar.
We really brought forward to you a calendar similar to what we've done in the past in terms of breaking up the departments and bringing them in for brief presentations, overviews of what's going on in their budget, big picture, but also provide you with detailed budget submittal information at that time as well, provides an opportunity for discussion. And this is similar to what we've done in the past where we use the February, March, and April meetings as opportunities for those presentations. And that all feeds into a presentation of a recommended budget from myself to the board around the first part of May. This would be targeted, I guess, at May 4th at this point. And then we have deliberations of this body, of this committee, and that goes on to the board for discussion and final action in the latter part of May into June and has the budget in place for July 1. So this is pretty similar to that. I would make one adjustment that we just talked about today, which would be we had moved Parks up to February to join that group, which we would like to stick with, but would move back solid waste to the March meeting. That would help us sort of balance those dates a little bit and help us work through some other budget considerations as well. So if we could make that one adjustment where solid waste fund would actually land in your March presentations with the rest of the public works groups, we'd like to make that one alteration here, but otherwise go forward with this calendar as presented.
Where was Parks originally?
Parks originally had been in March and moved up to February.
Okay.
And we'd like to keep it and we've made that adjustment in this schedule from what
see.
I first sent out to you. But I would like to slide solid waste back so it's with the rest of the public works group. So if that's okay.
Is there any discussion? Do we just need to approve this or accept it, or do we need to do anything?
I think if you
Because
just
this is-
indicate you're comfortable with that,
Okay.
we'll move forward with
No.
implementing that. I'll share that with the board again as an update, but we've already kind of put this out there so folks could prepare for it.
I just have one, well, go ahead.
Question. The departments present their budget, and then the departments present their budget to us, and then y'all go through revisions.
Right.
I wonder how hard it would be for us to, I don't need a fancy red line, but for you to just show us maybe in the margin what you changed it to so that we don't have to search through and say,
Show your
well,
edits.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we'd have to look at what our system provides. I mean, we do make
I don't care if
adjustments.
it's the
Yeah.
worksheet where y'all write in the margin, just so I can see what was changed. I don't need it to be fancy.
It does vary department by department. You know, some of the departments come in and they basically do the bare bones continuation type of budget, and then they'll present to you, these are the 2 or 3 things that we want to do. And they're really not in the budget that they present to you, they're kind of alternates. And if the alternates don't make the cut, we're right back where we started, so there's not a lot of markups from that. But I think we can give you a narrative that would
We can show you some things.
Yeah.
what's changed.
That way we don't have to search through and say, well,
Yes.
they had asked for this, but now
Yeah.
it's
Thank
not
you.
there.
Plus the alternates, if they're highlighted well, so we don't miss those.
Well, that's not
Because they're
always
usually-
in the
sometimes.
line
Yeah,
item.
It's not in the line item, but it's on a separate sheet
Right.
usually.
We'll look at ways to show you that. You know, we do give you pretty much straightforward the request from the department. What you see in these meetings are their request, and then we work that through from an administrative standpoint and work with those departments to conclude what is a final recommended budget to you, and there are a number of adjustments along the way. We'll look at what our system can help provide to
Yeah.
in terms of
And I-
showing you where we started and where we end up.
I don't want for staff to have to go to a lot of trouble. Like I
Okay.
said, we can really take the, if they're taking the original budget and just jot something down the margin.
Well, we may even look at a way to create a original submission column and a final recommended column, and they just be right next to each other, and it'd be the same paper.
For the newbie, is there last year's budget reflected so that it shows any differences?
We
I
will
mean, not
typically,
like
yeah.
descriptive, but like a number?
With the line
Yeah, it
items, you
is.
will typically
Okay,
get
good.
prior years, a couple prior years.
Okay.
You'll get what's projected for the remainder of this year, and then what the department is requesting for the upcoming budget year.
Okay.
I will add, I've asked departments to go 2 more years out. You're not budgeting 3 years, but I would like them to give you a look forward at what the next 3 years looks like. We're only going to adopt the 1-year budget, but sometimes it's good to see what may be coming down the line and what the implications are of certain decisions. If we defer
Yes.
certain things, they may ultimately land in that 2nd or 3rd year. We want you to see what that looks like. Sometimes there's longer-term staffing issues that may be driven by growth or other things going on. So we want to show you a little farther outlook and give you at least a 3-year outlook of what we expect. Obviously, we're approving the 1-year budget, but it gives you a sense of what else might be out there in the departments. So that's going to be an added element to this that we will ask the departments to present at the times we come before you as well.
Are you or the administration giving any directives? You and I talked about seeing the Metro comment that they were asking departments to go 2% cuts really from the existing year. But now we're not thinking about that. Have you given any sort of idea to them about, perhaps any growth in the amount of money that would be available, or?
We really haven't honed in on anything specific. The general tone, we talked just this morning with the leadership team, is that we're not going to be a whole lot different than we are right now in terms of budget, that we don't expect a huge amount of growth. I don't see maybe the declines we had a couple years ago where we were reducing, collectively in 2 years, 15%. I don't see that happening. But I don't see a dramatic increase at all, and it's probably largely going to be in line with where we are in this budget. I would generally estimate. What we're looking at is the sort of things we've deferred and not done without over the last 3 or 4 years that we may need to look at again. And what are those things that we need to catch up on that we've deferred that are important in terms of services. That's the kind of thing, and we're going to be very selective. And that was the story of last year's budget, which increased a little less than 3%. There were some selective places that we did some things that were maybe some catch-up, maybe some things that we just needed to do to be more efficient long-term that we invested in. This is probably going to be very similar. That's the way I've sort of left it with staff at this point, that we're going to be overall probably in line with where we are today. We just got in yesterday the November sales tax numbers, which were up 5.6%. I'd love to see the December numbers, first part of February, to really, once we get our 2 big months in, then I feel much more comfortable about starting to project where revenues are the rest of this year and extrapolating that out into next year. I don't know if we've seen anything from the state yet on revenues.
There's a state funding board preliminary number, but they usually update that sometime after the legislature gets in session, and they kind of see what the direction is going to be, if there are any major changes coming. The other thing we have is a big item is property tax, of course, and that's typically due. Most people pay that February 28th. It comes in, towards the end. So, we have a good feel for the amount that we're going to collect. But there's a lot of adjustments that are made in January and February as people start to pay it and they catch things, and we get some add-ons. The property tax, for example, on Federal Express and the railroads and so on and so forth, we don't even know what that will be until about mid-February. So usually it's the middle to the end of February before we're really comfortable making a forecast on what our income will be.
I would say generally we're going to be in line with the kind of budget we have now. In terms of general dollars, might be a little bit larger, but there's going to be some other inflationary cost increases, things we're seeing that are going to eat away at that. So overall, we'll probably be about the same ballpark we're in now.
What's the percentage right now of our collections on property tax so far? Do we know? Or what have we done?
It's in your report.
Yeah.
But we
I
only
didn't
have
see
the
that.
numbers really through December, and
Yeah,
again,
and some people don't-
most
generally
of,
don't.
we're running at about the average that we always do.
All right, about the
Yeah,
same?
Which is in the,
Same.
like, 30% range
Yeah, I was
for
thinking-
November and December.
All right.
But historically, I mean, we collect 99% of all the taxes, 99+%.
Well,
So
most people escrow.
We're
Which
in,
is really,
we're in a good position compared to other counties.
Is this on the agenda for Tuesday? The budget calendar, is it on the agenda? Okay, so we put it on.
Okay, good.
Okay, we did go ahead and put it on there.
So-
So if you could
We-
make a
we-
motion
we
to
just kinda-
accept,
oh,
that would be
Okay,
great.
you want to
Yeah,
do that then?
that would be great.
Have a
I'll
motion?
make a motion for acceptance.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Okay, and that is with the solid waste moved down to
With that one
to
adjustment.
March, okay? Any other, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
the other question was, according to this, it says Finance Committee, let's see, when budget hearing says needed. So
I
after.
remember that.
Right,
We
remember we
only do
did?
that.
Yeah.
Whenever they are needed. I don't
Yeah.
think last year.
Last year we
needed
didn't have it,
We
I don't
did.
think.
I know.
Well, we had-
We had like one or two.
We
Yeah, we
But-
scheduled kind of the week, but we ended
Right.
up using maybe one or two days.
One or 2 days, I
Yeah.
think. So, but that would be between the 14th and 17th, is that correct?
Right.
Is that what I'm reading here?
Mhm.
So if we had to have them, that's when they would occur, and then we'd be finished, pretty much.
Exactly,
Okay,
yep.
got it.
And ready to go to.
And then that would
Board.
forward that to the
Yeah.
full board, so that the first
Okay.
public hearing on that happens the second meeting in May.
Anyway.
Okay. That's important, too.
Yeah.
Item 4 is consideration of the minor text changes to the federal tax compliance policies related to bond issues. And I think you can tell where the minor changes are on that.
There are very few, they are underlined.
Underline.
What I sent you was the exact black line copy that we got from our bond counsel. Just a little history, when we did the Build America bonds and the Recovery Zone bonds in '09, our bond counsel recommended that we adopt these policies because inevitably on those issues for sure will be audited by the IRS. We know that's going to happen. And they recommend that you have these policies in place. This is simply an update to those policies that we adopted in '09. And they make a few changes that are principally targeted towards the change in the forms that they're now using. So this is really a minor text change, and it's pretty routine.
Is there a motion to recommend this to the board?
So moved.
Second.
Everybody any discussion on it? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
And that too will be on the Tuesday agenda.
Item 5, the consideration of renewal of the revolving loan agreement with the Industrial Development Board regarding the Nissan project. And we have a lot of information about that, but the actual action is just going to be to make some minor changes.
That's correct. There's actually an amendment document that was sent out late. Rather than re-adopt the document, it was recommended again by bond counsel that we just have this specific amendment and leave the original document in place. This really corrects two things that were done in error at the beginning. One of them is the amount of the interagency loan between the city and the industrial board that was agreed upon originally back in 2005. And the other thing is simply updating the dates, so that if we do this amendment, it looks kind of silly if we're in 2012 talking about ending our loan agreement in 2010. The language in the actual document says that it will continue until the authority will continue until the loan is paid off, but this kind of cleans up the language. The real purpose of doing this amendment is the bank with whom we have the letter of credit that backs up the bonds has requested this amendment. The banking officers have been perfectly happy with everything the way it was so far, but as you know, the banks are being audited much more tightly now, and their lawyers have asked for this as more of a cleanup.
But we've increased it, we've gone to 5 million on that?
Well, we've understood it to be 5 million all along. In fact, if you look at our disclosure and our audit report,
So,
since inception, it's been 5 million, and we've been through 3 auditors,
and they never cut?
and they've always thought it was 5 million. And the bank's lawyers found in one document in the transcript where this was stated differently. So what we're trying to do is to make this number match with reality, if you will.
Yeah, right.
And maybe you could just take like a minute or two to tell about this, because it is an unusual circumstance, and I don't know that any of us were on the board whenever it came in, just about the fact that what we borrowed the money for, and why we're having to loan the board the money, and how it's going to be paid.
Thank you, Ann.
I asked him earlier whenever
I don't want to always ask for explanation,
but
so.
seriously.
It's good for all of us.
I was the only one here.
See,
Yeah.
nobody, virtually no one, Bev and maybe
Dana.
Dana were the only 2 that were on the
Okay.
board, so.
Lay it out.
This is one of those
Really
stories that starts once upon a time. Once upon a time, the state came to the city and the county and asked us to support the relocation of the Nissan project here. The original idea was for the city and county jointly to provide the land for the project and also give an extensive abatement, tax abatement for that. A lot of things happened in the end. The city decided to provide the land, and the county decided to provide the abatement, and we divided it up that way. In order to pay for this without taking money from the general fund, it was set up in a way where the incremental taxes from Nissan and the area surrounding Nissan would retire the bonds that funded the purchase of the land. We did not own the land when Nissan came here. It was actually owned by Crescent Properties, and some of their land surrounds that. And much of the taxes paid on that property is what is retiring the bonds over a 20-something year
It's a
period.
tax increment financing
Thank you.
district is what
Yeah.
that.
I guess my question that's going ding ding is why?
Well,
Why, here I go. Why is Nissan so special that we found them land and the county gives them abatement?
Jobs, money.
We do that all the
I
time.
know, and that's,
well, this was a very
Jobs, money,
unique
and-
opportunity. The state wanted to see substantial local participation, but the state really drove the deal. While the city purchased land for $15 million, we also received $12 million of roadway improvements from the state that went into McEwen.
Okay.
That's helping pay for McEwen Phase 3 right now. $4 million of that is part of that $12 million. So the state contributed into infrastructure that is benefiting our community, but they wanted to see the local governments with, if you will, skin in the game. And so our method was to go ahead and purchase the land, and it was established in a way that the incremental taxes generated in that district over time would pay for that.
okay.
So really, the taxes generated by Nissan and some of the development that happens around it are going to pay for that. So you're really capturing taxes you don't have at the beginning to pay for that.
That will continue
improvement.
through
Yeah.
the long haul.
That, over the long haul, and once we pay this off,
We're done.
start to come into
Kind of
the,
like, we'll help you get in, but you're going to pay us rent for the rest of your life.
A little bit like that.
Well,
it's not rent, but it acts
taxes-
as kind of like
taxes.
that.
Okay.
But in essence too, that whole area was not hardly developed. And everything that comes in now is in that TIF district. So that goes to help pay that off, and that's
Well,
a really
if you
good thing
notice
for
the
us.
report that we sent out, I think Eric
Last
sent
night,
out
mhm.
late,
Yeah, it was late, though.
that had the information. If you
Yeah,
go
that
back
came
and
through.
look at it, when the deal was done in 2005, in the entire district, we were collecting, I think, $30,000 in property tax, city property tax. We're now collecting just shy of 900,000. And in a very few years, it will be, we believe it'll be in the 2 million range when this is done.
When other development that we know is in the pipeline happens.
And so this is the section of Cool Springs that's Embassy Suites down?
Yes.
Because the
Embassy
other was
Suites-
already kind of there.
Embassy Suites is not included because it was already there.
Right, I guess I meant
But any
beyond.
new
That's the
Yes,
Senate.
but that's right.
You got it right.
Anything after that, yeah. Plus that district, the TIF district has been enlarged.
Yes,
What is the TIF district, Bev?
TIF
The
district is
TIF,
what he
it's
just
called a
referred
tax
to.
increment financing district. It's a funding method, if you will. The actual district's called the McEwen Economic Development District.
Okay.
And it included all of the properties around the new McEwen interchange that were not developed at the time that Nissan announced.
Got it.
Nissan themselves are helping quite a bit on this because they'll pay about $250,000 to us this year. And that's, if we had gone the abatement route, we would not be getting that.
The other part of this is the county chose to do a long-term, larger abatement. That's the choice they made. We chose to do this land transaction and use the TIF district to help repay that over time. In the startup period, the TIF district itself isn't generating the entirety of principal and interest payments. So through the Industrial Development Board, we have an agreement to basically loan them money to help cover the balance that they need to pay that obligation. So we're keeping track of that. We're charging interest for that. And it's really going to start cash flowing positive this year.
This is the first
Yeah,
year
talk a
that
little
we'll
bit about it.
actually move into the black. So we're looking at conservatively about $100,000. It could be as much as $250,000, depending on these tax pickups that we get in January and February of the year. In other words, we still don't know what some of the properties are actually going to pay this year.
In that TIF
We know what
district.
we've billed, but there are corrections that come in all the time. So, and it also depends on the fluctuating interest rate, because the bonds that we chose to support this with, I say we, the industrial board, chose to support this with, are variable rate. And that rate is very, very low now. It's less than 0.5% for taxable bonds. We don't know how long that will last, so eventually we would like to see them move this over to a fixed rate. But we want to make sure that we're in the black and well above it before that actually happens. So what we're looking for is to extend the current arrangement for somewhere between 1 and 3 years, and we're still negotiating that with the...
Was the initial plan for it to be done in 2010?
Well, the original bonds were done for 25 years.
Okay.
And we're into our 7th year. Our internal goal, if everything went perfectly, was we would retire them all in 12 years. That's the other reason for the variable rate bonds, because you can prepay them early without penalty. You can't do that on fixed rate bonds. You have to do refundings that are fairly expensive. Little did we know that the fall of 2008, we would hit the wall financially, and that put basically everything into neutral for the last 3.5 years. But even then, if you go back and look at the forecast that we did kind of this is the perfect situation. Well, if one thing goes wrong, this is what will happen. If 2 things go wrong, this is what will happen. We're in the 2 things go wrong category.
But we're coming back out.
So after the worst financial collapse in 80 years, we're still in not terribly bad shape. There is a possibility we can pay this off early. We won't hit 12 years. But depending on how we finance this, how long the rates stay low, it could accelerate. And it depends how quickly things develop.
Are there any other similar deals like this?
Well, if you go to the big cities, you
mean,
mean in
for
the city
us.
of Franklin?
We don't have anything else
Yes.
quite like this. We have other places, other deals where we have done abatements or been participated in things that have helped developments happen. But nothing quite like
This
this,
is
and
the-
nothing involving
Yeah.
the land purchase to this magnitude. This was a very unique deal. Obviously, a international headquarters that came to town and brought somewhere around 1,200, 1,300 outstanding jobs. So all of that together made this a situation that you had to do some things a little different. And Andy had a very aggressive role that the state was taking on and wanted to see their partners on the local level and the city and county stepping up
Right.
and doing some meaningful things. So this is the form and the path that the city took. And the good news is that the district is now going to be paying its full way this
Yeah.
year and then have some excess. And that'll be a question that we'll come back to later in the year is how do we allocate that additional $100,000 to $200,000 with the opportunity to pay additional principal, start paying the city some of the interest it's owed? How do we balance all that with the idea of expediting the payoff of this as quickly as we can so that it starts going to other things too, so.
Thank you for that explanation so much.
And I do want to say, we didn't have the same deal, but we had a similar deal with Primus, which was the first large office building
Yeah.
in the area there. So this was not unheard of at all, and certainly not in the state of Tennessee, where they have that. But this was a major coup
Right.
for Tennessee, period, and especially for Franklin.
And we are very selective at where we look at incentives generally. I can tell you from when we talk to these different development opportunities that come our way, one of the big things we sell to them is the incentive you get every day is the lowest property tax rate of a city of any size in the state of Tennessee. Any city of 25,000 or greater, we have the lowest property tax of the city there, and that's a benefit that is here ongoing. And, you know, we could raise our rate and then give you an abatement, but why would we do that?
Yeah.
You know, let's keep it simple, and that's a benefit you get ongoing, and we don't have to come up with any unique structures to do that. So that's always our first selling point, and then we look very carefully at what the unique opportunities are and that it really is a value added to the community if we bring anything else forward.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say too, that very last statement that you made, the opportunities for our community, because on TIF, on the TIF district that's happening in many different states and different areas, what we had the opportunity for, other areas, communities are fighting over it, they were fighting with us over this, you know, who's going to get this. And it's such a big deal for our community because they know what it means in terms of jobs in the community. Then they know what it means in terms of infrastructure and investment, and then long-term investment and long-term overall for the community. But one thing I do want to say that they still do pay the taxes to the schools. They weren't, that was not something they could do. They were
That's
required to
something
do that.
that the listening audience
Yeah.
needs to know. Williamson County, and when we do these deals, the mayor can attest, it's always done with City of Franklin and Williamson County in tandem.
Together, yeah.
And within the state, we're the poster child for the right way to do this, because Williamson County
Yeah.
took the position that they're not going to give away any school money, period. So only the portion of the county taxes that does not go to schools is even in play. The city has recently taken the position, and we did so with Verizon, which was the last abatement that was done, that we're going to do the same thing for
great.
public safety. So, you know, we think that's the way that it should be done. There's even been legislation introduced at the state level to follow our pattern and enforce it throughout all the counties, so that you don't have one county trying to steal from
Yeah.
another county.
To make it
But-
standard.
But the abatements that are done here are very selective. I know in my years, I've heard the answer is no a lot more than I've heard an answer of yes when we talk to the industrial recruitment people.
And upon that same thought, and I'll be quiet here, but I just want to just say this for your benefit too, that we have some other corners over there that have been sold, Vanderbilt and the other corners that have been sold to somebody else that's looking at investments there now. So if those come online, then that'll add to our TIF district.
And
bring
do
more money
we
into that.
vote on the deal that's given, more or less?
Yes.
On
Okay.
which
Yes,
deal?
we
That
do.
one?
The-
No, any of the
As
abatements
something
and
comes
or
forward,
property?
you
Yes.
need to abate, and we always make it clear that that's the board's decision. We can
Okay.
talk about a framework, but it ultimately comes down to what the board will approve.
And since we're
Or the
talking about
county
the
commission.
Nissan, it was unanimously approved by
yeah.
the board and the industrial board at the time.
I just wanted to
Mayor,
make
if
one
please,
quick
thank
comment, won't prolong the discussion about TIF anymore, but I was looking at some numbers the other day as far as the average wage in
Oh, yeah.
Franklin, Williamson County, and when Nissan came, that took a significant jump up, so.
Because you're right, they are they were good
Good jobs.
paying jobs. Thank you for making
Thank you.
that point.
Good quality.
Okay, so, but what we have before us then are the actual, just the
Amendment.
change, the
The
amendments.
amendment document is what
That was the
we,
one that you sent last that says, number
says
5 amendment.
amendment to revise-
11912 is in the corner.
And
That's
if
what
you-
we'll put on the tomorrow, or Tuesday's agenda.
And if you'll notice, it also needs to be executed by the industrial board. I received today the notice from the industrial board that as soon as we adopt this,
Oh.
they're going to meet and adopt this as
Yeah.
well.
I so move that we adopt the amendment.
Second.
Any further discussion?
No, good.
All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no.
Aye, aye, aye.
But I thought this was also, all the material was also very helpful, too.
And if there's any more information about this particular issue or any of the other abatements, we'll be happy to fill you in on those. I might also mention, they all have termination dates,
Gotcha.
with the exception of Nissan, because there is no abatement from us, but all the others have a period where either there's a dollar cap or a number of years, and then it goes away.
That was good to have that additional information. But item 6 then, discussion of the debt collection for city court.
We're bringing this back from our last committee meeting, and since then, I know Steve Sims had shared some other details with you. We just wanted to follow up on that, provide any opportunity for discussion or clarification of what we do, how we do it now, and how we might move forward. Really, the request at this point is just the support of the committee to move forward with a request for proposals for collection agents, folks that might perform this task for us, and bring that back again to the board for a final decision. But we'd like to see if we can take at least the step to go forward and see what is out there in terms of our options to have this as a tool in our toolkit, if you will, and in collecting outstanding obligations from essentially municipal court. And Steve's here has done a great job of pulling together a lot of information in terms of process, in terms of what's out there outstanding, how the outstanding revenues stand, and where we go with this. So I'll let Steve take it away if there's any specifics he wants to add, and then we can answer anything you would like to discuss.
Thank you. Provided some information to you a week or so ago. That information, there's been some revisions of that. I've got that. I did not make the packet in time. It is on the website. I think the thing is that there were some questions that you had about statute of limitations, about
Yes.
aging of these, how far back. That is included in there. If you'll note, the Tennessee Code allows us to go back 10 years. The information you have in those flow charts, the graphs, actually has a period of time of those which were prior to 2002. So you can pull that out. We were talking about 670,000 outstanding to court. 120,000 of that is before 2002. So that would not be part of that. There was some information provided about what our process is for follow-up on those. As you can see, there's a whole slate of things that we do relative to notices and additional fees and actions that are taken in order to solicit their support to satisfy their obligation. So with that, I open it up to any questions that you have on what we do and how we might be able to support your requirements to help get this money in that's owed the city.
Now, let me say, we did get the second thing.
Okay.
I think you
didn't we?
did, yeah.
Yes, we did. The one that broke out the 2001,
Yes, ma'am.
issued after 2001.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was helpful.
Okay.
And the biggest chunk of this is in 2008 to 2011.
Right.
Really, quite frankly, our biggest emphasis would be that group and then having this going forward as a tool for us. I think realistically, that's where it's going to be most productive. And to just have this as an element of our process with essentially an expert that knows how to appropriately make those requests, do those follow-ups for outstanding debt. And so this would be just another tool to help us do that more effectively. One of the things that Steve included in the back shows a good number of other Middle Tennessee communities, all of which do this. That's, I think, on your last page, that show you, gosh, it's about 9 or 10 communities. Really, Franklin and Hendersonville are the only ones that do not have a collection agents working for them. So, we would use it judiciously, appropriately, in a targeted manner towards the areas we think are really the larger scale ones that we have not been successful at collecting, and that we think these experts might help us do a better job on.
Okay, there's several things that, some of them we've answered just a little bit, and I appreciate your putting the information about how our collections agents work in other areas besides courts. That was very helpful. Is the statute of limitations actually 10 years? Because someone was telling me about some new debt statute that came maybe in the last year or two about, and I don't know what it is. I don't even know enough to.
I'm unfamiliar with that. When I talked to the city attorney about that, the advice I got was it was 10 years. But I've also heard from, in conversations with some of the firms, the representatives of those firms, that there has been and is proposed some legislation which would allow more ability to be able to pursue older debts by municipalities. But I know of no specifics. They couldn't provide that, but the attorney has told me 10 years.
Well, okay, so we definitely are not looking at anything that is beyond the statute of limitations, number one.
No, ma'am.
And that, we just need to say that because I think that was a concern, because we did have those shown to us before that were earlier than that.
Right.
One of the things that I read in some of the other areas where collections agents are already being used is there is a last letter stating that if you don't pay this now, it will be turned over to a collection agent. I assume that we would put that in with these things also.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think that could make a difference. And at this point, we're not doing that because we are not, we did not turn it over to a collection agency. So our letters now that go out have not included that, but they would after this.
Yes, ma'am. We're working with the city attorney to revise really all of our correspondence to ensure that we have the appropriate legal language in there to support any efforts that we might have to pursue that through a collection agent.
Because I noticed there was one thing where it says that written notice was not required about something, but just a good faith effort.
That had to do with the utility bills.
Right.
That, yes, ma'am. In fact, what ends up happening is some of the local utilities do not issue those notices in all cases. They don't issue late notices. We continue to issue late notices on utility bills if they don't pay.
Okay.
At what point does it turned off, though?
In the case of water, it's about 2 months after the time that you initially are presented a bill, and if you haven't paid and met your obligation within that period of time, you will be disconnected.
And that's really the only one we do. I mean,
Yes.
right, is what, I mean, the only
Yeah,
utility that we have
Sewer,
control
but that's,
over. Okay,
tied to water.
Ma'am?
yeah, that's right, we don't do.
Water and sewer.
Okay.
Tied
There
together.
are two aspects of this that I wanted to ask about. You state in here something about a minimum amount that, because it kind of makes it cost more to get it out than it would be to collect it on some of them. Would this also be subject to, and what is your number?
Absolutely. There would be a minimal threshold. Clearly, it doesn't make good business sense to spend $1 to collect a quarter. And so, in the case of this, our parking citations are initially $11. I don't really see those going to collection agent until such time as they build up some kind of balance. If they don't, as you know, the parking citations go 11, 26, and 51. So by the time you've gotten to that third, you're really right at $100. You're at a point now we need to let the collection agent pursue that if you haven't responded to our request for payment.
So you're thinking around the $100?
That's basic. What we have is a multi-tiered approach in all of our collections efforts. It gets successively more demanding, if that's the correct word.
Sure.
First, we start off with a friendly reminder. It comes basically at, let's call it level 1, then it goes to supervision, then it goes to the city attorney. What happens is that the city attorney, as we know, has things up above their eyebrows, and so in order to do, some of these are really better handled through a professional who knows the ropes to do that. So the $100 would be the appropriate threshold point to, I think, to be able to say, and it's hard, like I said, it's the third time. That's what, 51, 26 is 77, $88. Well, that's not 100, but you've got the third offense within the year and you didn't satisfy it. That, to me, is an indication that you don't plan to satisfy it, and we probably need to get some additional support.
So you're thinking maybe the 3 tickets, if we're talking about parking, and we do need to say on the others, so many of the others besides parking, they have court costs. Court costs are not assessed on the parking tickets.
Not on overtime parking.
Overtime parking, I should say.
There are other parking offenses, and a lot of the I'm going to call it higher dollar, people that owe us a couple $100, their violations really came about because of parking violations in fire lanes and handicap parking. And then in those cases, court costs are assessed because those are Tennessee code violations. And in those particular cases is that it got to those amounts because they chose not to play with us. And so we had to take some additional actions to try to encourage their participation.
Okay. And the other thing that I wanted to ask about is items that by themselves will be required to be reported to the state and would result in losing their driver's license. How do we handle that? Because, you know, it seems to me that would be incentive enough, you know, to think you better get down here and pay your ticket, you know. Now, but those are mainly moving violations, right? Or
Yes, ma'am.
Or documentation, meaning that they don't have what, driver's license or insurance?
Yes, ma'am. And that's an excellent point. We would still continue to follow that same process, where what would happen is that we notify the State Department of Safety, and the potential for you losing your license exists if you don't satisfy that obligation. One of the big things that's happened in the last year or two is that the state now allows us to process those electronically. So we notify the state, pass those files along electronically, so we send a few hundred a month to those where those violations are occurring, and we're getting payments that come in. Not that all of them have an outstanding obligation, but we have to report that many kinds of activities to the state. And you can get your license suspended for not satisfying those obligations to the municipal courts. If you didn't have insurance, if your driver's license isn't there. And so one would think it would be a good incentive, but unfortunately there may be a lot of people on the road who are not driving with valid
Licenses.
licenses.
But would we wait and see if we do get money after what the state does?
I think that's.
Would that be,
It would
I mean, would that
most
be a thought?
appropriate. Yes, ma'am. And I
Let that
think
process
that
work for us.
What I would recommend is that we notify the state sends them a letter and says you've got 30 days to satisfy it. And so what we would use is that transfer point, that point which we pass the information to them, is that we give them 60 days. And so if they haven't come in, within that period of time, that's a good indication, I think, that they probably don't plan to come in.
But that would give them that time frame that the state gives them.
Plus.
And then
Plus-
you notify the state and their license is tagged, so to speak?
We don't have to, we notify them when they didn't
come- didn't
satisfy
they-
the
that's right.
obligation. If a person is cited for one of these moving offenses, they're given a court date. If they don't come in and satisfy it by that court date, then we give them a few days, mail processing and so forth. The payment may be in the mail, if you will. And then we issue another invitation called a failure to appear. There's additional charges are applied, and we give them a new court date and say, all right, this is kind of it. And if they don't meet that date, then we send it in to the state, and we notify the state to effect action. We don't do any more after that. And so we've gone through a series of notifications to these people, and so they've been given quite a bit of an opportunity to be able to satisfy it.
I did a little bit of research, which ended up being a little bit moot, but checked with Franklin City, Brentwood, and the Sheriff's Department to find out, okay, say Bev got pulled over. And if
Could
they run your license, if you were to have had a parking ticket, and only a parking ticket, that has not been paid, does that show up? How does that show up? And interesting, all of the different, law enforcement agencies said that it shows up only as guilty. It doesn't put a status on it, whether it's been paid, it's been averted or anything, which is interesting because, and this is kind of crazy, but you get the mindset that if someone were to run your license, that they would automatically know, you've got unpaid parking tickets, Mr. Sims. But that's not the case.
No.
And
But
so
they
it
have a
seems,
suspended license.
yeah, so the only things that are attached to the driver's license are the serious offenses.
Yes.
But what's
Maybe.
sad is if, I guess, I would think if it's attached to your vehicle, that it would be great if all of those different violations could be red flagged through a driver's license, so that if you did get pulled over, they go, well, Ms. Berger, we see that you have some unpaid parking tickets as well. And so you're automatically engaged in a responsibility situation instead of just, oh, I see you had tickets. What the status is not a part of it. I know it's a state thing, but
Well, let me tell you, it's really just a recent thing that even the moving violations got sent to the state.
No kidding.
And not every place, not every city has that yet.
That's an excellent point, ma'am,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the things. The electronic use in the court systems and criminal justice systems are really expanded a lot in the last few years, and these kinds of use of sharing information with other states, because there's reciprocity with these states, so that information is shared. If we picked up somebody with Montana and they got that,
we got
it's
that.
going to end up reported. I think Montana is one of the states of reciprocity. A CDL license holder, used
Yeah.
to, they would get driving school.
They no
The
longer
judge
can.
is absolutely prohibited by law to allow someone who has a CDL to go to driving school.
Commercial.
And so that's another effort to try to get these things done to make our roads safer.
And also, there's also records about when a person did get to go to driving school too,
Yes, ma'am.
which did
because I was
not,
almost on the honor system.
that's right.
When was the last time you had a ticket?
That's right, yeah.
What do you want me to say?
Not anymore.
Right.
We are
I
not.
haven't had a ticket in a long time.
Even if you go
right.
to, even if you come to court, you have to be, and you get driving school, we report that to the state, it's on your record. There's no indication, no points applied. All it is said, Jane Jones went to driving school, and that's it.
Because you don't get points.
No, ma'am.
if you do that. But things are working better. But you know, and I think they are, we're working toward improvement on all of this. Well, so now we're saying basically we're looking at a minimum amount. And if the state, if it's a violation that the state is notified about, we would give them that time that the state gives them, plus another 30 days. Well, I think that those are two of the things that I was concerned about. And of course, since I saw that the last letter before turning over to collection agency is going to say, this is the last letter before it goes to collection. The other thing that I saw on court, besides the moving violations and other traffic violations, was the codes violations in there too. And do we put a lien on the property for that?
No, ma'am. We have that. There's some options of things you can do, and there's some actions that I know the city attorney has asked for some information that about what actions can a municipal court do. In order for us to go through those kinds of, quote, legal actions, we actually don't have the authority at our level. We have to take it over to a higher court in order to pursue those legal actions. A judgment at our level really doesn't give us any great legal standing, and so there are some efforts to do that. We have not, to my knowledge, placed any liens on property. I think you're talking about property maintenance. Now, there are code violations
Yes.
that are not property
You're right,
maintenance.
but I was
issues.
really thinking, whenever I was thinking about that, I really meant the property maintenance.
ma'am.
Thank you for making that point.
Well, there ought to be a lien for property maintenance.
Okay, well,
I had
that...
some questions.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I just had a couple of weeks ago an inadvertent conversation with our city court judge. He seemed to think that, I think maybe we were just talking about parking violations, but there was a 6-year window on collection for those,
For parking.
for parking.
We'll only pursue those which the city attorney allows us to pursue.
Well,
We're not going to...
But let's make sure then that we have
We'll make sure.
the correct information about that.
And
Thank
the
you.
other
Thank
thing,
you.
he cautioned that if someone had gone into a bankruptcy and had officially gone through bankruptcy, and the collection agency continued to pursue, that then there was an issue of about, he said, up to $250,000 liability.
There are some liability exposures. I have drafted an RFP. There are, I want to say, about 10 pages of requirements in that particular document. And there's some insulation provisions in there. There's approval provisions for that in there. As far as bankruptcies, we are notified on bankruptcies, on local bankruptcies. Where you're not necessarily, it was very difficult, is again going back, somebody got one from Montana. We might not know that somebody in Montana filed for bankruptcy. So there's provisions. Again, these are the kinds of things why you want the professionals to be able to do that, but rather than the city pursuing those kinds of things. There are certain things you can say and cannot say, do and not do, language that can be used and not used. And so by allowing a professional to do that, they're more engaged in what those proper things are.
So will there be protection from liability for the city for these people that are acting as our agents?
Yes, sir.
So that's...
We would build that into our agreement with the collection
And
agency.
y'all would have approval on that once we got to that kind of point, that there'll be a contract. And that's what Mr. Stuckey is talking about, is that this really leads up to a point where we will have a contractual arrangement that is approved by y'all, that says, you know, this is what, you know, the responsibilities are of that agent who is acting on our behalf.
And I was going to say, we also want to make sure that whoever becomes our agent is one that has a reputation for being a professional in the sense that they are doing, that they have a reputation for doing things
How they handle-
correctly.
Yeah, how
Yes.
they interact with people.
Yeah.
That was
Go
the other thing
ahead.
I was going to ask, that on the selection committee, I hope we would include our city court judge. on who evaluates if we put these out for bids?
That's a thought. But at any rate, as I say, I think one of the things we would be doing would be
He has not.
checking their reputation,
doesn't do it.
for their business reputation, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
There was another, I'm sorry,
One
go
more
ahead.
thing.
Go ahead.
I was surprised that none of our local, I'm finished this last one, but they have no bench warrant authority for any of our city ordinances.
There,
That's something we've been looking at. We need the state to provide that authority.
Well, since the highest fine that you can have in city court is $50, it's kind of hard to.
Well, but
For each
there's another
offense,
thing on the
though.
horizon.
That's
For each
Different-
offense,
different
for each
story.
Are we
Go ahead,
finished?
no,
Already?
Brandy has a question.
For each offense.
Well, I have a question, and I have a couple of just clarifications. Basically, the burden for the charge from the collection agency is put on the consumer, not the city. Like if you have a $100 fine and say it's, I think 40% I read somewhere, the person with the ticket is going to pay that 40%.
absolutely.
Okay. And also, too, not being very aware of the bid process of how we select our vendors. This is interesting because we're not doing the best bid or whatever. This is, how are we going to select a collection agency? Is it based on, see what I'm saying? It's not based on money because they're getting their money by what they charge.
RFP.
It's reputation, it's,
As part of and I'll be happy to share the proposal with you if you'd like that, but what we end up doing is that what I've drawn in there is there's a set of criteria. And the economics, when you start talking, it's not, remember it's not just a low cost, it's best provider. And many of these, what we're talking about is looking at a process that allows us to look at their processes, what correspondence is used, what their reputations are. They've got requirements to be able to submit, who else are they doing business with in the state, and what those experiences are. We'll be talking to those
Okay.
people to see what kind of experience are you having with it. Are you getting, run up the flagpole? Then we need to know about it.
Yeah,
And so,
are they what's the percentage of, I would want
Exactly.
to know what the percentage of collection.
Success rate, if you will.
And
Yeah, what's their
that's
percentage of
all
a
part of the-
collection? That's in there,
Yes, ma'am.
obviously.
So most of the time, they just go after things that are local anyway. Like you were talking about somebody in Montana, they may, because it
Typically-
gets real sticky when you go across.
Typically,
state
there's a
lines.
series of letters that are written, but they have access to databases that we don't necessarily have access to. We typically, in a court level, we follow along the driver's license address. And that's what happens. The officer writes that address on, we use the state records. Someone doesn't update their information, we don't, it goes out into mail space.
And then lastly, I know that we're saying now there's a statute of limitations. I just personally feel like 10 years is way too long. I don't know what the magic number is, but I want to be a part of that decision because whether it makes a difference or not, because there's 3 or 4 of us, but I just think an arbitrary number of, I'm not even going to say, but I think we need to be fair about whether we've had the wherewithal to collect in a very timely manner or not. I mean, this debt is out there and some of it may need to just be, we're going to do a better job down the road. I'm not saying all.
But there were some breakouts of some numbers
Yeah.
there and so that might be something to consider. I understand.
Yeah, I saw the,
Yeah,
kinda-
and I don't, I kind of feel the same way about that, too.
I just think everybody as a nation and even as a city are having a hard time. So I think that grace is the magic word here, but also what we've done to do what we needed to do to collect. I'm not saying, oh, well, we need to forgive it all and start tomorrow. Not at all. But there needs to be a wonderful, sweet, happy balance of what's fair and not fair.
No, and give us some ideas on that. Would that be okay? to
Yeah, I
say?
don't have a number. I'm just saying.
After 10 years or so.
That's something we can
10's
share
not
with
good
you.
for me.
There were some threshold points that, and the stratification, and
Yes.
that's some.
When we get
Some-
ready to
some-
move
some
forward with
reasonableness
this,
maybe
after
in
the RFP, we
those.
can
Yeah.
maybe come back with some options.
Okay,
and
okay.
Give you some recommendations on that aspect as well.
And
Free
there
day.
are some other comments or questions, and our options are, continue the same course and not pursue legal actions using our legal department, or then pursue a competitively bid contract. And so,
which would
I say
really
we
be an
start
RFP.
courting.
Yeah, we would go ahead and do
Yeah,
a selection process, RFP process essentially, and then come back to you with a recommendation from that process. That would really be the next action
Yeah,
for,
'cause-
really for the board.
So is there a motion for?
I recommend that we
option
pursue
three?
number 3 for an RFP recommendation to the board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion, although I think we've had good discussion?
It's very helpful.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Thank you, and thank you for
Thank you, Steve.
all your help.
Steve?
Let's see, okay, item 7 is consideration of changes to city policy on the city doing business with employees of the city.
Have our purchasing director, Brian Wilcox, come up, but this had been, we're revisiting this issue from a prior discussion with the committee when we were updating some policies over the summer. And Brian and our HR director, Shirley Harmon, and Russ have worked on some things here and wanted to bring this back full circle to you to talk about where we go from a policy standpoint on the issue of doing business with an employee or employee's family and how we might approach that issue. So I'll let Brian take you through that.
Thank you. Good evening. When we last discussed this subject last summer, at the time we were recommending changes to our purchasing policy, and you approved those changes. One of the changes that we recommended was to solve an apparent inconsistency between what the purchasing policy used to say and what our human resources manual says on the subject of the city doing business with employees. And we solved the inconsistency by simply referencing the HR manual. But in that discussion, you asked that we come back and revisit whether that statement in the HR manual is an accurate reflection of your wishes. Today, staff is recommending that that we can keep that reference to the HR manual, but tweak the text slightly so that it's a little broader and addresses not just services that might be provided by an employee who has a second job with another employer, but also the possibility of representing that employer with the sale of goods. So the recommendation that we're presenting to you today for your consideration is that the HR manual be slightly revised to address not just the sale of services, but the sale of goods and services.
And I do want to note that on the last page there, I had asked about the state of Tennessee policy.
Correct.
And it says then that bidding by state employees is prohibited, period. Doesn't say anything about relatives of them. But the state policy, as I recalled it, it is correct that it's not allowed at all.
I've got a couple questions. I'm not sure I've got them all together yet, but check down the first page. Except for the receipt of the compensation, blah, blah, blah. Should be privately interested. Okay, the word privately, that under background, 1, 2, 3 bullet points, 3 bullet points down on background. The first paragraph under the third bullet point said privately. Is that the key word? Privately interested, or profit from directly? In other words, privately not going through the proper process. Is that what that means?
I would defer to our city attorney's office on a definition of the particular word, but I read that to mean that outside of their employment with the city, outside of their official capacity as an employee of the city. In other words, it's a A private interest, I think, in this regard, means an interest that is separate from their employment
Yeah,
status with
okay.
the city of Franklin.
All right. And then, number 3, keep going down one more paragraph, number 3, the contractor performs services with the city, they have to meet the criteria. Under 3, the service performed must not present a conflict of interest nor a conflict of time with the employee's regular duties. So I get the conflict of time, but conflict of interest, how does that mean? Such as if they were performing one kind of duty for the city, then they couldn't perform that specific duty on a contract for the city, right?
That's
In their
certainly a
area of
rational-
expertise?
Here's how I'm looking at what the conflict of interest really has to do with is who's making the decision to make that purchase. We should never have a situation where the employee of the city who could perform that service as a private individual is the same person that's making the decision to make
Right.
the purchase.
Sure.
That, to me, would be
Okay.
a conflict of interest. We want to avoid that.
All right.
Question. If we're talking about time, so if an employee was on leave and he wants to do the same duty as some kind of leave, does that allow him
Like
to
a
do
contract.
this?
Contract services, you mean?
I don't think so, because it talks about not include any service which the employee might provide in the normal scope of their regular duties.
Yeah.
So even if you're on leave,
You can't
if
do
you
the
would do
same
this
thing.
in your normal job,
Yeah.
or it's associated with what you do as a job with the city, that would, I think, eliminate you from being eligible to do this.
I was noted out there, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
The HR manual actually already addresses that, and as far as the conflict of interest, that's also already defined by our municipal code, so this would just reference that, and as Brian explained, that's exactly what it meant. Someone making a decision on an item, that's how the conflict of interest is going to be defined, so.
And then when it says immediate family, are they defining immediate family as immediate? I mean,
That's-
wife, a husband, and children, and that's it?
That's also defined in the municipal code, and it's quite a bit broader than just, it includes siblings and goes even farther than that in our municipal code. Our ethics ordinance in Chapter 7 of Title I does define immediate family.
So if
So-
my son had a business and he wanted a contract with the city, he could not do that?
Well, that's, again, there would be.
It would fall under these
Yeah,
conditions,
yeah.
and it would require the approval of the city administrator and look at these 3 criteria.
Oh,
Right.
we have that already. I see somebody frowning over there. That happens already, you know, with somebody that has a business, legitimate business in town, has been dealing with the city for years. But.
Well, if it meets
but
these
that
criteria,
would
they can do
still-
it.
That would still be allowed.
Or doesn't conflict with these criteria,
Yeah,
however you want to.
Right, or doesn't,
Yeah.
right, right. Which I think is a good thing, because I don't think people ought to be penalized just because they are related to somebody if they have a legitimate business in town and they provide services in our city. I mean, this isn't New York City, I mean, it's like, we run into people every day. And we have businesses that are interactive with other businesses, and I don't see why they shouldn't be interactive with the city if they meet the criteria, as you say.
Well, we're trying
Yeah.
to describe where that line is.
Yeah.
So that it can be clear for everybody about,
But too.
where you can do it and where you can't do it,
Mm-hmm.
and how it relates to your responsibilities with the city, and so that there's not a
Mm-hmm.
conflict.
Okay, so does conflict, like, if we were going to put something out to be sold by bid, and the employee worked in that department, is that's going to sell the whatever?
He's not making a decision.
Is that a conflict of interest?
If it's a formal procurement process, I would say it's not a conflict of interest because that employee is not able to influence the decision.
And as long as it's not close to or aligned with their normal duties with the city,
Well, I still have.
What if that employee, then wouldn't we recognize that he might have more information? Let's say it's a vehicle, about that vehicle than an outsider that's making a bid. You see?
We're selling a vehicle?
Yeah.
I still have a problem with the employee themselves. I truly do.
Does this happen this often, that we,
I don't think you have to worry about it. It
So,
just needs to be in here.
so why don't we just follow the state law?
Because we have our own mind and we would like to have our own say as a city.
Well, but as
And
I
think
say-
we ought to as a city.
But you also have to avoid the appearance
Exactly.
of impropriety.
That's why.
Yeah, there's a black and white way
Why
of
we
just
have
saying
this.
no.
Well-
And you could do that.
But
But then you also could eliminate an employee or their family member who has a legitimate
Yeah.
separate interest from competing at all, and then we have a decreased competitive environment, we have a detriment to that employee or their family. It's a trade-off.
Now, let me say.
It's not
though,
an easy answer.
The state law just says the employee or official.
Doesn't
It
say.
does,
Right.
should not.
Well,
And
the state-
that,
Sorry.
go ahead, please.
The state law also says, though, the employees, or to have any interest in the selling of the same to the state. And what that means to me is that if the employee's spouse is wanting to do business with the city
That
through
constitutes
that
an interest,
employee's employer, that spouse's employer, excuse me, the state wouldn't allow that. And that does
Do we
come
have a
up.
legal opinion from the state about that?
Well,
No, I mean, I'm asking because I guarantee it's come up.
okay.
Because as I say, I was just taking this to mean the official or employee. And you could have an interest in something by being a partner with someone else.
So we can look at that,
Yes.
see if there's any
So what you're just
clarification,
saying
but
here is that if you have Mr. Smith, who is an employee of the city, and his wife, Mrs. Smith, has a legitimate company out there, then she would be prohibited from bidding on anything with
Say
the
she
city.
bakes pies, Mrs. Smith's
Yeah,
pies.
there you go.
No,
She
but-
can't
but-
sell pies to the city?
Yeah.
But now,
For our dinners.
let me say to you,
We usually
though,
don't bid on
it's not
pies.
like we're a 1,000 people in the city, and that we have,
It's a small.
we have that,
Community.
I'm sorry, 60,000 people
It's a
is one of the
small
top
community.
10 cities in the state of Tennessee in terms of population.
It may be, but it.
I
it
mean,
is-
it's not Dallas,
Here's a
but,
scenario, because you always put it in your own personal.
okay.
Okay, I have a son that's a screen printer.
Yeah, there you go.
Say, because I told Ken I want a BOMA sweatshirt. So, say that, I mean, like something that it's, but here's where I come off. My son would give us a better deal because he's my son. He would want to help and do it not for the profit. But then that's going to negate any, that I know the city works different. We don't get good deals. We get the best three and pick one.
Thank you.
No, I mean, that's just
No.
the way it is by law, but I mean, so could my son not
Bid.
bid on that because he's my son?
Well, see, here's the thing that I'm saying,
look out as a
that I'm
board.
seeing as a
That's a
difference.
criteria.
That I'm seeing is the difference in our city and the state law. Because,
But where would that fall under the way this is written?
well, see, our city here says
here comes Ken.
immediate family.
I would think,
He's here to
We can't
sell
have
us.
that.
I don't know, the way I would read
Or,
that, at least the way this is proposed, your son could propose
And
it.
even more so, if you have the capacity to spend $10,000 and less, if it doesn't even go by anybody, that falls on, it could fall on you,
Right.
and could be more here soon,
Well, but that,
right?
That's a different issue.
but that's something too that is discretionary that I can bring to you even if I think it needs to have
You
the
could have stayed there, but it could have.
the light of day to it, too, so.
I don't actually have a problem that we differ from the state. I just think we ought to be fair, and we ought to use our own brains and to say what fits our community, and what's good for our community, and what's good for business here in the community, and what is legal, and what kind of criteria do we have, and if this looks,
And full disclosure.
yeah,
Just like,
and open. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I hesitate in the free marketplace to try to limit and put more regulation and more regulations on people. We've got enough regulations.
But haven't you heard about other cities that had problems with this?
That's why.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have this, and that's why we have our criteria.
Well,
And
it
if they
doesn't
meet
matter,
the
they had
cri-
criteria too.
Well, they weren't very good at implementing it,
That's right.
and I have more faith in our community and our people
Well,
here.
as I say, I think it's the
So-
appearance of impropriety as well as
Well, then we ought to all go
impropriety.
home, because there's appearance every day of everything that we do.
I beg to differ on that.
Well, sometimes there is.
No, I certainly beg to differ.
You know, but what I'm saying personally is I'm comfortable with this, and I think that if it doesn't line up exactly with the state, I'm okay with that, as long as we are very clear and we have our criteria and it's spelled out.
Well, I think I also asked about someplace like Nashville. What is their policy? I didn't just ask about the state. I specifically asked about the state because I remember seeing, knowing about that personally. But, I mean, what does Nashville do? Do they have this elaborate, who are the, interested, the other parties besides the individual?
I don't know what Nashville does, we can
Well,
find that out. for
that
you.
was one of the things that I was
Sorry, we
asking about.
missed that. We can fill that out.
Yeah, because, this is not
look
like,
at
this is not
Germantown or
like,
something. Look at
yeah,
other small
yeah,
cities.
okay.
Have
But I mean,
metropolitan-
it's not like,
Metropolitan areas
it's
are a
not
little
like
different.
we're inventing the wheel
And can we
ourselves.
get some direction on what the state's interpretation
Of the interest?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It seems to me all the time that people are trying to follow Franklin, because Franklin's always setting the bar and doing things, but yet we want to go and follow other people. And I'm not saying I disagree with you, Ann, that we shouldn't look at these places, but I don't think we ought to define what we do here just because so-and-so or Nashville or Germantown or somebody does it. I'm not opposed at all looking at
Well,
what they
maybe
do.
other
I'm not opposed
places,
to looking at
maybe
it,
other
though.
places don't have all the other interested parties. Maybe they just talk about the, because ours apparently talks about not only spouse and children, it talks about,
And I will say, that was from the model ethics ordinance that was passed back in 2007, that the state suggested and the NTES provided, and when the big state ethics overhaul essentially was going on.
so what,
So is
So
this
are
in
they-
conflict with what?
I was going to
they've
say, is
done
this in
there on that?
conflict with their model ordinance?
Could be, because they apply ethics to everybody else but themselves.
No, I don't think
No,
this
ma'am,
is
it's
in
not.
conflict, no. This uses that definition of what the immediate family
In the
is.
conflict of
Okay, but
interest.
I mean, are they, then do they had, as a part of their model ordinance, this thing that we're proposing?
Not necessarily about employees. The model ethics ordinance was really setting forth the definitions of conflict of interest and when employees and elected officials have a say in things, so to speak. So it's not in conflict. No, ma'am.
One of the things
But
with.
they don't have it in there.
No. For employees bidding on.
They may not
Yeah.
address this
That's
issue
right.
specifically, but one of the things with ethics ordinances is it's not necessarily the black and white of no or yes, it's also how you define certain elements and that you disclose them, and that provides clarity
Right.
about how you're
Absolutely.
handling a process. So it gives you some ability to develop your own policies, but gives you sort of a common language and a common way to identify potential conflicts so that you deal with them in as transparent a way as you can.
But in fact, we have gone further in saying that not only, because the actual rule is, in the state, as I understand it, is you just have to disclose. It's not that you cannot vote on something. But haven't we changed ours to say you cannot vote on it if you have an interest? It's not that if you disclose, you can still vote on it?
No.
Because that's the state law.
We do not have mandatory recusal on things.
We follow the state
No,
law.
I know, I'm
We
saying-
follow the state law, but individual members make a determination
Right.
themselves about disclosure and then where they choose to.
Could we look back at our own
Absolutely.
ordinance? Because I think I read in there somewhere, it said, oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm misstating. The state law says you may announce it and you do not have to recuse yourself. The city's law says that you have to recuse
Yeah,
yourself.
I will definitely double check.
But
that.
I'm.
Well, if there's a
Because
direct
I-
interest or benefit, yeah.
Right.
But
absolutely.
the state law says if there is one, all you have to do is announce it, and then you can still vote on it.
But you're saying
But the city changed theirs, I believe.
Our city?
As I say,
I will,
yes.
I'll double check.
So how does that work
Absolutely,
when-
because I could be getting the two confused as well.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't know how that works, because we vote on things, and we have somebody on the board that votes for money that goes directly to their agency. And they didn't recuse themselves, they state it publicly, and they go ahead and vote on it.
But if you look in our policy
And
now,
so,
I think it
I'm not
does say
saying
that.
anything detrimental about that person, I'm just saying, do we understand the law? Because that's already happening, and they're not recusing themselves.
But as I
And then we
say, I
have
thought whenever
somebody-
they went over our ethics policy with us, though,
I mean-
that was in there.
And-
So
and
I'd
then
like
we
to
have
see,
other
that's
people-
beside this, so.
Yeah, we have
let's
other
just
people
go on.
recusing themselves when they don't really need to. So it's like.
That's a personal choice.
It's personal.
Exactly,
That's right.
and they may do that, but I just don't know about the other one.
Again, it's personal interest, and in that instance, it could be that the individual does not have a personal.
Yeah, everybody can
direct
decide on-
monetary,
yeah,
direct
exactly.
personal interest, so.
Well, how would you like to proceed with this issue? Do you want us to bring this back? Do you want us to bring it to a work session so the whole board gets to engage in this fund?
That-
Or,
that might-
yeah,
You get to work session, they've got all that.
how do you want us to do this? I mean,
Send a
seriously,
memo.
we can pull more information in terms of some other examples. We talked a little bit about the specifics of the ethics law, how it might apply here, and understanding how we locally apply it versus what's on the state books. We've got some guidance we've provided that just defines some criteria. If you want us to tweak that, we can look at some options there further. We just want to make sure we're being clear with employees and those involved about how we're going to approach this issue. And we recognize some conflict when we're updating some purchasing policies over the summer. So we just want to get there one way or another so that we can have clarity on it.
So can I move we defer it to the work session with new information?
And sometimes we bring it back to the committee, or sometimes we bring it to the whole board. It's up to you how you want to
Whatever.
proceed with it.
What's
you
the
wanna go to a work
committee,
session with it?
work
Is that
session
what
or
you said?
back to
So
us?
that we have input from all the, because it
Yeah.
affects the other board members.
All right,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
Because they may have
move
questions
to
and-
Send
Yeah.
it for.
They-
to work session.
might
If
as
I
well
may,
discuss.
the specific issue or the recommendation that we're bringing to you this evening is simply to make some revisions to the HR, what the HR policy already says on the subject. You have at the bottom of page 2, the 2 paragraphs that are already in the HR manual. And the recommendation that we're bringing for your consideration this evening is to revise the second of those 2 paragraphs slightly by broadening it to include both goods and services, not just services. So the recommendation that's in front of you this evening is fairly narrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But still.
Okay.
I mean, it's
Just
all,
wanted
it's
to make
all of a
sure
piece,
we
it's all of a
conveyed
piece.
that.
We got it.
So, but
So the goods and
was,
services, I agree with the goods and services. I mean, if you're going to do goods, let's do services.
well, no,
Do
it's-
services,
if
let's do
if it's
goods.
services, then we would do goods, since it
vice
is
versa,
services.
yeah.
You should
So
it.
is it the idea that we would go just to the work session?
I think the full
Or come
board
back here?
needs to
Okay.
discuss this.
So
So that's your
then,
second?
Yes.
okay,
Is that what you said? Yes.
okay.
Well, we'll bring that forward for
Okay, well,
future discussion with
I
that
guess
group.
we need
and
to say,
That'll be good.
all in favor?
Amen.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, then, number 8, consideration of resolution 2012-05, a resolution to repeal resolution 2009-25 to authorize the city administrator to execute contracts and agreements on behalf of the city for amounts of $25,000 or less without first seeking approval from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. And the repeal is that we have it for $10,000 right now, right?
Right.
So-
This is something that came up also looking at what we do in terms of purchasing policy and practices. And as you did back in, I guess, 2009, you made the adjustment to provide certain administrative authority for the city administrator to do things up to $10,000. I report those to you on a regular basis, so you see actions taken on your behalf. And that was originally set up to line up with our bid or our formal sealed bid process requirements. That aligned with where we crossed that threshold that we required advertisement and sealed bids. And so that was originally part of the logic why we picked that 10,000. And as we headed into this fiscal year, starting July 1, 2011, we adjusted that threshold up to 25,000. So the natural question that Brian and others asked was, well, should we adjust that authority as well? And that's what we're bringing to you, is that question of, do you want to return to that alignment of that formal bid threshold being the same administrative authority you grant the city administrator, or do you want to have that sort of that difference between the two? We just adjusted the one and hadn't adjusted the authority, and then the question of alignment and efficiencies associated with that alignment came up, and so we thought we would bring that to you. I'm a little self-conscious asking it because it's about my authority. So Brian may be able to speak a little more towards the kind of the business process rationale for it. I'll kind of let him talk about that. But I'll tell you, what we've done with it since you've offered it to me, and I think it's been a good thing, is that it's helped us be more efficient and do some things in a more timely manner. Obviously, we try to be very on top of reporting those to you in a timely manner so that you can see those actions. And as I've said from the beginning, just because I have the authority doesn't mean I always will exercise it. There are times we bring things to you that are under the authority because we know you're interested in it, or it's of a nature that the board needs to weigh in and have a voice in that. And regardless of whatever level you set that at, that's part of the discretion I think we always need to operate on, is there are things the board just has an interest in or needs to be involved in, regardless of dollar amounts and authorities. And that will remain, I think, to be an important element. So I'll let Brian talk a little more about the business reason and rationale for this, and we're open to other discussion from there.
The one thing I would add is that you have an example of a situation in a recent agenda. On January 10, the board agenda included the contract award to Pittsburgh Tank and Tower Maintenance. And the dollar amount of that contract was between the two amounts that we're talking about. It was $14,000 and change. So because it's a contract, it would need your approval, but the selection of that vendor did not need your approval because it was underneath the new $25,000 threshold. And that's what we're trying to, I guess, I like the way Eric described it. We're trying to return to having those two thresholds be synchronized as they were previously. We've upped the one from 10 to 25. We're asking if you would like us to, or if you would like to up the other so that they're synchronized again.
I just had a thought. Does this also include just contracts with persons for services as well as product?
It would be all
contracts.
items.
Well, I was just thinking, we have several contracts for services, even with professionals that are below that.
It would be inclusive of that,
That
Again,
might
we
be.
report it, and those in particular would be the kinds where there'd be judgment
That's
about
right, that's
what to
right.
bring to you,
That's
because
what
if
I
it's
thought.
especially something working on certain issues or something directly with the board or a project of particular interest, obviously we're going to want to bring that to you for your you weighing in and that you're comfortable with that selection and how that's going to fit into whatever we're doing. So, there would definitely be those situations.
I could see more problems there. The tank, is kind of cut and dried, and as you say, would not require our agreement on picking the bid if it had been bid,
Right.
But there could be some problems I can see in some other instances, maybe even in this too, but especially if you're, I think we had someone comment to us about someone that was doing automotive repairs or something.
Not sure if I remember that.
Yeah, I'll say something.
You've given me no reason to think you can't handle responsibility. You do a great job of advocating to us what's going on. I say, up the ante. That's me.
Well, I think it works here, but I do think that we do need to be careful about this. And also, maybe not everyone has the great judgment that our present city administrator
Exactly.
has.
This is not just about Eric, this is
No,
about
it's not.
other people in the
This
future.
can
too.
always be.
There may someday be some
Yeah,
business in
that's right.
that.
And it can always be changed.
Right,
Again,
Yeah.
Well,
we have
and
somebody that we don't.
honestly, that's why I thought it was important from the beginning to report to you the actions we're taking, so that you can see the nature of them, and if you have a
Yeah.
question, and I do occasionally get a question, you can ask them, and if you think it's being misapplied, you can tell us. I mean, you know.
Have your allowance.
Yeah,
Well,
you can
The
raise the
contract will
issue.
still be.
Yeah, it
He's
will
our-
be
he's our
done,
reporter.
but if there's a pattern of.
That's right.
Of going where you don't want it to go, you can adjust the authority,
Yeah.
or you can hold me accountable for the kind of decisions I'm making.
Yeah.
There's discretion in the use of any authority, and that's what we try to do, and there are items under 10,000 that will require your attention, that just do.
Are you, well, there are some that you will decide to bring to us and
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, I thought I'd better bring this to you because, there may be some controversy here or whatever. And you use that judgment, I think you use it well. But usually these things that you're doing here are always within budget. You're not going
Yeah,
outside the budget to
That would be
say.
another thing,
So
wouldn't it?
So could-
that's
Thought
something.
about this.
But
Yeah.
I would think that if it was within budget, you would be looking at that. And if it was out of budget, then you'd bring it to us.
Yeah, I think anything
Actually,
that.
that's an important point too. As long as it's in the budget, that's one thing.
Yeah, I
If
think
it's
that's got-
in addition to the budget.
That's kind of assumed in my mind. If
given.
we're doing
Right.
something that
Yeah.
gets into adjusting budgets, we're going to have other discussions with you. That's just
Yeah.
natural. Now, if you want to build that in somehow into this, we could look at, I don't know how we do that, but,
But has everybody kind of agreed this
So it
would-
doesn't put you in the
would just
red in the
go-
budget
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
area, I would say.
Can we
Don't
sunset
overdraft
this
the
for a change in administrator?
Not a bad idea.
Well,
It's not a bad idea.
I don't
That
know.
the policy needs
That's
to
a
be
good
really
question.
looked at.
okay.
Reassessed upon,
Well, so,
But I would hope so.
so are we,
I'm good with it.
can we
So
move this
pass
to,
Move it
to the
to,
zone?
move it to BOMA. I'll still move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Amen.
Opposed, no.
Moving right
Okay,
along.
thank you. Okay, consideration of professional services agreement with Waller, Lanston, Dorch, and Davis, LLP, for the development of Franklin Standard Construction front-end documents at a cost of $49,000.
This is one that we've been working on staff for a while, and it does have a hefty price tag to it, but it has a lot of potential benefit. And this would be working with an outside legal firm with expertise in construction law to develop a standard front-end contract for our benefit that we would use in all construction projects. And I'll just share with the board some direct experience that I had working in this kind of situation. When I first came to Hamilton County, Ohio, they had just gone through a large construction project. It was the football stadium, and it had a large overrun. Again, that was before my time there, but one of the lessons learned from that process was we hired an outside attorney with construction experience to develop a front-end contract that we used for everything we did in the next project, which was a baseball stadium. And the contrast in those two projects was dramatic, and one of the elements was having a very well-written, consistently used contract that we used on every building trade in a very complex $300 million project. And so that's something that's been in my mind since getting here, is that, boy, we need to look at that. David and our legal department, Shauna and Kristen, have been looking at ways to do that, and really feel that the best way, most effective way to do that is to really bring in that expertise to assist us. One of the things we added to the financial impact that I thought was a really interesting way to recapture this over time, that really Russ and I discussed in looking at this, was to look at an opportunity to recapture that as a project cost over the next several projects that we do. For example, say the next 10 projects, we build into that project cost a recapture of $5,000, so that we really pay for it ourselves through the construction projects over time. We have budget capacity that we think can do it within the general fund, but think that that might be a good way to really assign it to the different funding sources and different contracts that really will benefit from having a document like this. What happens in absence of it, you're either using an outdated contract or you're using an AIA-based or some other trade-related contract that really is written by them for them.
Yeah.
And we need something written by us for us to kind of put ourselves in a better position. So that would be the rationale I would bring to you, and I think there's this kind of thing, while it's got some expense on the front end, really pays off over the long term to put you in a stronger position when it comes to contracting for these services. And we know we have some significant capital projects on the horizon, and I'd love to have this in place as we get ready to do some pretty significant projects. So I'll let David and Kristen talk about their perspective on it too.
Well, I think Eric's covered it pretty well. I will point out that our outdated front-end portion was written by me and my firm before I was a city. I was a city engineer before I was an employee.
Time ago.
It is outdated, it's that old. We have revised it over the years, and Kristen and Shauna actually recommended we talk to somebody, a law firm, construction law firm, concerning this, and I went into the meetings with, we don't need these guys, and all this. Come out of the meetings, we need them. There's a lot of changes as anything else over the years. Laws change. Construction is very complicated now from what it used to be. And they pointed out some things, as if you went through what they pointed out some things that we're lacking in our front-end documents that we need to cover. There's also some things that in next year we probably would want to start looking at getting some more, like LEED and things like that, documents set up for that. But anyway, I am in favor of doing this myself. I think would be very beneficial. I have actually been working with the law department since before this lawyer was even a member of our staff, trying to update and get these updated. But what happens is this just keeps getting pushed back because we have something, well, we got to get this done or we got to get that done. So it's just time-wise, we're not able to dedicate the time necessary to go through and get it done. It does sound like a lot of money, $49,000, but as I've heard several of you can make comments, seems like anytime we go out for a study or anything like that, it costs a lot of money, and it does. So, but I do recommend that we need to get it done. We need to get it done before we get into these larger projects. We are trying to get the capital funding set up to where we can start some projects. And I think we need this done prior to doing that.
And with some of the water sewer projects that we know are coming
Yeah.
forward.
Okay, I was going to ask, you immediately think of construction as being a building, but what things would
This is all
also be?
construction. This
Yeah.
would be all
You're saying
construction.
water, sewer, roads,
The main difference
as well
in-
as buildings?
The main difference in your front-end documents, let me explain a little bit, I guess. Front-end documents are your legal aspects of your contract that you have for a construction project. The main difference is going to be your bid form and your actual contract, which
I see what you
incorporates your
mean.
bid form.
Okay.
Everything else is basic in as far as your legal requirements and what they have to do. Then, attached with the front-end documents are your technical specifications. That's the reason we call it front-end documents of your specification. The technical specifications will still be written by your consultants because they are the technical things that have to be adhered to as how you'll be doing the construction now. So the front-end documents will be usable for all projects. Now, we are going to have variations when
Sure.
we have grants or federal monies and all that, because they require additional things that we don't require, which this will be a part, they will be looking at that with us on this too. So we're actually going to end up with basically two different front-end documents, one for when we have state, federal funds, and when it's just City of Franklin funds because of that differences. But construction
kinda-
projects are all, as far as that part goes,
everything we're gonna do.
they're pretty much standard, and they'll still have to be revised a little bit depending on the project itself concerning the insurance requirements and things like that.
And that's the reason we would want to go with the custom document suite.
But we go with the
Instead
custom.
of the,
Oh, yeah.
just,
If you're
Then you
familiar
fall
with,
into this
if you're
hourly rate.
familiar with
Yeah.
AIA or
Yeah.
EJCD documents, when you go to a project, well, when you use those documents to start with, you have to pay for them every time. Either that or you're actually going against copyright laws. But you also have to revise them every
That's
project
too
you do
expensive,
because they're just so generic. You have to go through, you redline through, you end up with a long supplemental conditions that changes the general conditions, which I know you probably don't understand what I'm
That
saying
makes
there.
sense,
But
actually.
anyway, but this will be customized, it'll be City of Franklin, all contractors will see it, they'll get used to it, et cetera, and it will cut out on mistakes. A lot of the mistakes that Eric was talking about gets back to using these other type forms of documents that have to be redlined and revised, and that's how they're changed for each project. They're not rewritten, they're redlined, and then you do a supplemental condition, so that's what we're talking about.
Well, like Eric said too, you learned from that up in Hamilton County, and we don't need to be wasting, this seems like a lot of money, but $49,000 is nothing compared to the money we would waste and continually waste without this in place.
You could in one major issue with a contractor, save this.
and we
then
have
some.
had some
Wouldn't have
issues.
to get
We have had some issues
Yeah, it wouldn't be
before,
much.
so yeah.
It
that's
wouldn't be
something.
amazing when it
That's
didn't matter.
right.
with-
Right.
Yeah,
So if we go with this customized product, we own the product once they've produced it.
Yes.
Yes.
So if there are revisions, it's not necessarily,
We
This
we will
group?
be able to do some revisions as need be, yes.
so I guess the other thing is, the more customized it is, maybe the more revisions it's going to need?
It won't be that customized. I mean, it's going to be generic enough that it's going to cover our projects.
Okay, so is it worth the difference in the price of the customized versus the standards?
Yes.
That-
And
that's-
again, the
that's
reason
their
is,
recommendation.
once you start changing the standards of the industries, AIA is our Architects Institute of America, or American Institute of Architects, I guess.
That's right, that's it.
And the other is the Engineering Joint Council. They're written for covering or for protecting the architects, for protecting the consultants. So once you start just to change those, then you still got some of that other language in there. This is going to be written where it's going to protect the city of
I was going to
From the
say,
beginning.
Wallow
This is gonna
Lansing
be-
would be representing us.
the
Right,
city of
right.
Yes.
Franklin, absolutely. So that's the major difference, and I think that is enough to justify that little bit of, well, that extra expense from
$12,000, yeah.
the,
Are there any of these additional design construction documents that are on this list that we know that we're going to need? And
we're going to need them, but we're not going to need them until we can get into a budgeting process where we can actually budget what we want to look at, and in the meantime, we can get a better handle on how much those would cost us to have.
Okay, so this is not a time to negotiate these things?
We prefer not. We prefer not. And the other thing is, we're trying to get something that we can actually afford in an existing budget.
Is there a motion to move this to the board?
so move.
Second. And then I wanted to ask then,
Further discussion.
do we need to stipulate whether we do the 5,000 each project,
yeah.
or it comes out of whose budget?
Well, right now, it's coming out of the,
We can front it from the general fund, but kind of
Germany.
pay ourselves
Reimburse.
back, I think, is the way I would look at it, as a reimbursement through this other method. That way, it helps the water and sewer funds contribute, to this over time, because we know in the not-too-distant future, we're going to have some water plant upgrades and sewer plant upgrades at a minimum that are coming through the integrated plan, just to keep up with regulatory requirements. So
Right,
those would
'cause
be a good way to
it's not-
capture them.
It's not fair for legal to fund this entirely, you know.
Well, the reason we're trying to go under legal's budget is it
We
is
got
a
it
law
now.
firm.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they're in charge of the,
Outside counsel.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, one of the
outside.
things we did a couple years ago in the budget is consolidate all the legal fees into the law department so that we manage it centrally, which I think has been a smart thing. And this helps us draw on that funding, because we haven't used all that much of that at this point.
Probably.
So that's a good thing, but that way they're managing it too. So it's a good place to source it out, but I'd like to establish an ability to reimburse ourselves
I agree.
over the next few years for this cost, so that the general fund gets some of the recapture of this, because the other funds are essentially going to benefit from having this in place too, or other projects are.
So I guess we'd still be voting to recommend just the 49,000.
Yeah, the option.
And have the
Option B.
and the details maybe
Yeah.
come a little later.
That's what I made the
Is that
motion
it?
on, was 49,000.
Okay. Okay, any other? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And let's see, we're down to item 10, which is the monthly reports for information only. Oh, and we also got today, didn't we, the other conference? Was that just handed out, or I'm not the only
Yeah,
person
we
who got
did.
that? We got this, because that was one good thing to see, because the conference center had a not so good November, but then they had a better December. Is there anything that we need to talk about in any of these reports? This is, as I say, for information only.
Yeah, I did highlight the January sales tax number up 5.6%. Collectively, we're up 5.5% over the the prior year. So we're continuing to do well. I think we budgeted around 2.5%.
I was gonna say,
So
so we're still above our budget.
we're a little bit above budget, which is good, and have one big month in. We'll get another big month here.
hope.
Once we get the December numbers, and we'll have a good idea where we are.
And at the February meeting, you'll have the quarterly report.
Yes.
It'll actually be next month.
And so that will be good, because then we'll see halfway through the
You'll see halfway
fiscal
through the year.
Halfway through.
Expenditures and revenues give you a sense of where we're at. Departments continue to do a good job of living within their budgets. We're spending percentage-wise under where we were a year ago in terms of budget allocated and what we're spending. So they're doing a good job of controlling expenditures, so.
The only one that I saw, the TMA group, it looks like they're, have a deficit in their spending versus budget. So, I don't know, does this include money that, I didn't look at that. Does this include in their revenues any money from us, from the city? I can't tell that it does, but anyway, that was the only one I saw, other than the conference center, and the new conference center one was back in line. I mean, it wasn't that we had to pay them money,
Yeah.
but I don't know. As I say, these are just for information for us, and the point is well taken that next month we'll see the first half of the year, the second quarter, so that'll give us the first half of the year.
Conference center looks good.
Okay, any comments on this, or, I guess we just acknowledge this?
I think,
or we
yeah,
need to-
you just get them as a matter of reports.
And we got moved to acknowledge and adjourn, right?
Acknowledged, yes.
Acknowledge, and adjourn.
Okay.
So, great.
There's a
Second-
motion to
second
adjourn.
adjourn.
There you go.
Speak
All in
up.
favor, say aye.
All right,
Hold your peace.
go home and eat supper.
I'm out of here.